To begin by asking this morning, did you notice shopping carts more this this week from last week? I know you did because I got some snaps from a number of you and some some text messages and pictures and some things about, and you told me some funny things about shopping carts and how you thought about putting them back this week. And maybe you did, maybe you didn't, but a little different way you thought about the shopping carts. Let me ask you this more importantly. Did you think differently about the people you came across? The effort that it would take to put a shopping cart back, taking a few extra steps, did you think about the people that you ran into, just a few extra steps on your part that maybe you could have engaged them? I hope maybe that you used your high five card that we passed out last week, and if you didn't get one, they're back on the table back there, and it's just a card where you can be reminded, write some names on the back, 5 people, places that you're going to be intentional about walking across the room, just to take a few extra steps to speak to someone, to engage them, and hopefully introduce them to Jesus Christ. You know, that's what Just Walk Across the Room is all about. It's us just taking a few extra steps, realizing that we have the greatest gift that's ever been given, and the greatest gift that we can in turn give to someone else is an introduction to the God who created them, who knows them, who loves them, who wants to forgive them and provide a whole new purpose in life. That's what we have. And so we're using that phrase, just walk across the room, the few extra steps and effort that it would take to engage someone to share this greatest gift. And last week, we began by talking about, what's involved, to walk across the room, engage somebody. Maybe you know them, maybe you don't. But we said you got to enter the zone of the unknown. You just got to take a little risk and walk a few steps, talk to somebody, put yourself out there, follow the Spirit's prompting. And it's not just at the moment what you feel like the Spirit's leading you to do, but what He's led you to do through His teaching. He's already taught us through the Spirit, through the Word, that we know we need to do some of these things. And then the last one was just do it. Just walk. Take some risk. What's the worst that's going to happen to you if you go and talk to somebody? But here's the problem. Here's the problem that we experience in the church with us. You can ask 100 followers of Jesus Christ, do you know some people who are far from God? And there would be 100 raises of hands. There would be 100 yes. I know some people that are far from God. And you could ask the question of those same 100 people, do you feel like it should be our goal that when someday we walk into heaven, that we're responsible for taking as many people of those people that we know are far from God? Do we have a responsibility to make sure as many get there as possible? And I think just about the same number of hands, the yeses would be yes. I think that should be our goal. We have a responsibility to do that. That's not the problem. The problem then is when you ask those same 100 Christians, then what are you doing about it? The number of yeses or the number of answers, the number of hands that go up drop drastically because we're doing very little about it. Even though we know it, we feel a conviction to do it. I heard Cam Huxford say this several decades ago, and he's going to be the speaker at our men's retreat in April. You don't want to miss him. But Cam said you could go into any church in America and ask the question, who here is ready to see the church grow? Who's here ready to see new people come to Christ? And said every church in America would give a resounding, yes, we're ready for that. But then you could ask the question, okay, what are you willing to change? What are you willing to give up? What changes are you willing to make in your church to see that happen? And so then the church grows silent. It's not the question, do we have the intent or the hope? Is that are we willing to walk across the room? Are we willing to make some efforts and change some efforts? Well, what's something that we can do? That's what we want to talk about this. Just walk across the room, that little extra that we can do. But let's be fair about this. I think it's a fair question to say, what do I do once I walk across the room? What do I say? What do I try to do? That is a fair question. And today I just want us to look at 3 quick things that I think that we can do when we walk across the room. The first one is this. develop relationships. Develop some common ground, some friendships. You know, so many times as followers of Christ, and we think about this great responsibility, we have this idea that we've got to do everything on that first initial visit. That contact, we've got to do everything, and it scares us to death. That we think we've got to have all the answers. And this leads to a feeling of inadequacy. It discourages, and a lot of times we just give up and leave it for someone else. I was reading this week, and it made me think of the Christians in Corinth. And Paul was writing to them, and they had a little argument going among the people, you know, that some great people had been there and led them. Paul had been there and taught them. Many of the people had been baptized. Apollos had been there. And so the people were saying, well, I was baptized by Paul. Well, Apollos is the one who led me to Christ. And they kind of were arguing about who was the most important. Paul wrote this back to them in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, starting with verse 5. He says this, "What, after all, is Apollos? And what is Paul? Only servants through whom you came to believe, as the Lord has assigned to each his task." Verse 6, "I planted the seed, Apollos watered it, but God made it grow. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who makes things grow." Paul set the standard. He reassigned, he resettled the whole argument. He says, look, we're just planting seeds, we're just watering, but it's God who does everything. So he took the pressure off of the people. And that's what he's saying to us. There's no pressure on us. God brings the growth. But we can't walk away from it either. And even if we agree with this and are ready to walk across the room, we have to fight at least two things that naturally work against us. Please get a hold of these things here. There's two things that naturally work against us as Christians. We insulate ourselves from those who are far from God the longer we are a Christian. Think about it. It's natural. The longer that I'm a Christian, if you'll just picture a graph, and each along the bottom is an additional year that I'm a Christian. Every year that we're a Christian, the less number of non-Christians we're usually around. It's a natural phenomenon because hopefully we're led our families to Christ and we're leading our friends to Christ. Maybe we stop going to some of the places and doing some of the activities that we did before. So we fall in love with our church family, so we spend more time with our church family. And the next thing we know is that we feel more comfortable with our church family, and we're around the non-Christian, those who are far from God, less and less. And so our relationships with them decrease. That's just a fact. It's a natural process. And it happens to every Christian unless we make some kind of concentrated effort that says, I'm not going to let that happen in my life. I'm going to make sure that I keep a relationship and exposure to non-Christians. You see, one of the problems that we have to watch out for is that we do not let these walls that we want to bring people into become a prison that keeps us in here. This is a great place to be with our church family. But if we come in here and we don't go back out and engage, then this has become a prison. Now, here's a second problem to overcome. As the years increase, as we're a Christian, we become less tolerant of non-Christian behavior. Think about it. You know, and I'm just using these as two illustrations. I grew up in a home where my dad was a 2-pack-a-day smoker. And you know what? I didn't pay a bit of attention to that. But once I got out, and I can go back into a service station or something where somebody smoked one cigarette, and you know what I noticed? A cigarette smell. I never noticed it before. Have you ever noticed people who have dogs? They pay no attention to the dog barking. But if you don't have dogs, that's what you hear. And you're going, that dog drives me crazy. It's what we get. We become desensitized to those things, or we become more sensitive to those things. If you can picture a graft again, as the longer we become a Christian, and as we're growing in the graces of God, and we're learning and we're coming closer to Him, the more sensitive our ears and our eyes become to things that are against God, things that would offend God or offend us. And so we see these happening, and what happens is then we kind of put them to the side, and they offend us, and we don't reach to them. And your fault, my fault, no one's fault, somehow we've left it to the professionals. We leave it to someone else to do this. Hey, look, let me back up here just a little bit. Foul language, I don't like to hear it. But if I'm around a non-follower, somebody who is far from God, and I hear them use foul language, that shouldn't close the door on how I feel about them. It just should say to me, they need Christ. If I hear someone, maybe, and you're exposed to so much more than I am, if you hear somebody bragging about what they did on their cruise and all the drinking they did, don't write them off. Even though that's offensive to you, or if they told how they lied to the boss, or how they told this person off, or how they went behind so-and-so's back, or whatever, don't let it turn you off to them, because we accomplish nothing when we do that. What's happened in the churches with the beauty of the early church, the beauty of the persecuted church around the world today, the beauty of the growing new churches primarily in the world today, is that they were and have becoming again churches of multiplication, not addition. And like I say, your fault, my fault, the church's fault, we have become churches of additions. We add one at a time, and we ask the preacher, or the youth minister, or the elder, or the Sunday school teacher, or somebody, a new family moved in our neighborhood, you ought to go by and see them. Why don't you go see them? Somebody's in the hospital. Would you go see them? No, you go see them. And we become churches of additions, one at a time. And you trace the history of the church, and we were churches of multiplication because so many were walking across the room to engage people. And that's what we're trying to do, is plant seeds, to bring growth, to make an impression, to establish relationships, common ground on that first visit, that first walk across the room. Well, here's the next point. Discover stories. Discover stories. Do you have any friends that you know nothing about? That's very rare, isn't it? If we have friends, we know their story. We know something about them, because our story is us. Our story is who we are. As we get to know people, we get to learn their story. And this requires that we listen. And this is another step. After we walk across the room and you engage that person, we just get to listen to them. Several crucial things here when we listen is that people get to talk. That's a deep one, isn't it? When we listen, people get to talk. James 1:19 says, "My dear brothers, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." And I don't want to take this out of context, so you would need to go back and read what James was talking about here. But the principle is that we need to listen quicker than we speak is important. Hearing is a physical ability, while listening is a skill. Hearing is a physical ability, while listening is a skill. I Googled just how important listening is, put that question, how important is listening? And every single result that came up, whether it was in business or school or career or church or whatever, listening is listed as one of the top key requirements of anything we want to accomplish in life. I loved what one article said. It said, "Many of us think that communication is talking, and talk we do, We interrupt, we advise, we reassure, we judge, we analyze, we criticize, we argue, we moralize, we threaten, we divert, we diagnose, etc., etc. But we do very little listening. This week, this past Monday, we were kind of celebrating Upward, making it through Upward one more year. And so we said, the staff, we said, we're going to go out to lunch. And we always try to have a staff meeting every Monday and either breakfast or something and just kind of plan our week out. And we said we're going to go eat a big lunch. So we went to Boss Hogs, health food, and we're going to eat healthy that day. And where the lady, for the number of us that was there and some other people joined us, we needed a bigger table. And the lady says, well, why don't y'all sit here? It's big enough. But it kind of put us next to a table that I didn't really even notice when I sat down. Was one lady sitting at the table. And as we sat down, she said something like, would you like for me to move so y'all would have more room? And we said, oh, no. I said, we're just here kind of celebrating and we've got through a big thing at our church and talking. And so she began to talk. She was going to be doing some business, and we just talked. Eric joined in. Several of us, we just joined in. We told her who we were, and then for most of the rest of the time, she was a very engaging young lady. She told us her story. And we were able to say, well, we're the church that's out on the road. You'll pass, you'll see all the big playground equipment. She has children, and we thought it was good to mention that. And she got to talk, and we got to find out her story. It is our hope. We didn't describe the plan of salvation to this single mom sitting in Boss Hogs, but it was our hope that just letting her talk and tell her story, where she's from, how she ended up here, and where she's working at, that when she passes this church to go home every day, there's going to be a fond memory. Those guys there, they listen to me. That's what we hope. Just listen sometimes. It's another thing that happens when we do that. People learn that you care. When you discover their story, they're made to feel very valuable. They're made to feel important. But something that's more important is just as important, they feel good about themselves, but they feel good about you. Have you noticed how when someone listens to you, you instantly like them? You feel better about them if they will listen to you. And people then in turn are more willing to listen to a change in direction if they like you. I've got to tell this story, and I got 50% permission to tell this. How many of you ever tried to work all day, pick up two boys from daycare, school, get them ready to come to church on Wednesday night, get them here, and everything just go absolutely smooth? No. Two little boys, you know how it goes. Well, one night, Kayla White, her youngest, he was having a night where it was, he was the mountaintop and he was in the valley, mountaintop and the valley. And as she was leaving on Wednesday night, he was in the valley for sure. And he was just having a crying fit, and she was trying to get him in the car seat and get Hunter in there too. And Sharon and Warren Grubbs were walking out at the same time. And Kayla said that Sharon just walked over to her. All she said was, "You look like you could use a hug." And she just hugged Kayla. Kayla will never forget that. I'm not saying we need to go hug strangers in Walmart parking lot. We may be seeing you on the news. But I am suggesting that if we learn to look for ways to show people we care, who knows what will happen. The next time you're in line and the mother is having a 3-year-old having a meltdown, that you can just say, "Hey, I've been where you are. Why don't you go in line in front of me?" You'll be surprised what you can think of if we learn to just care about people where they are. Well, let me mention another thing here. When we slow down and we just discover the stories of people, we learn to spot potential. This, to me, is the most exciting element of engaging people where they are and letting them talk and just listen. You get the opportunity to spot possibilities. That's probably a better way to say that. To spot possibilities in their lives. Have you ever watched the show Shark Tank? I'm surprised at some of the stuff I can get interested in on watching TV. Shark Tank is about these investors. They're multimillionaires. They know how to recognize an idea and invest in it and just make more millions off of it. And they have average people just like you and I come in and they give their sales pitch of this idea that they've got. And the ones that's on the Shark Tank committee, then they'll say, well, I'll invest $100,000, I'll invest $500,000, and they will work out some type of possibility. These guys are experts at recognizing potential and possibilities to make money. Jesus was a master when he walked on this earth in recognizing possibilities. He was able to look past the obvious flaws of people and see what the power of God could do in a person's life. I mean, just think about it. Over and over he did this. In Matthew 4:19, he saw a bunch of ragtag fishermen and said, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. They did and he did. In Luke chapter 7, Jesus saw through a woman's sinful past as she poured perfume on him and her tears fell down on him and she took her own hair and wiped the tears off of his feet. He saw past a sinful woman and saw a heartfelt worshiper. Luke 19, who would have ever looked at a short little man named Zacchaeus, a cheating tax collector, and said, I see a son of Abraham, I see a cheerful giver? Or who would have ever seen a risk taker in Nicodemus, the man who would come to hear about Jesus in the secret and cover of night, but would not speak up in public, but in the end stepped up and said, I want the body of Jesus so I can bury him. And it was not only while Jesus walked bodily on this earth, he continued in Acts 9 when Saul, a murderer who was trying to destroy the church, he saw the possibility in Paul that he would be a great writer and a church planter, and a foe became a friend. Now, neither you nor I are ever going to have the great ability that Jesus had to be able to master this, to always see the possibilities in people. But the spirit of his radical insight continues in us. We can have that spirit of not condemning people by being able to look through things, to give them the benefit of the doubt, to not to be offended by what they say or do, but to give them that benefit and not give up on them, to see the potential. If we really believe that God changes lives, then why can't we believe it about that next person that we meet? Why can't we believe it about the people that we see? Just walk across the room and give God a chance. Now, this last thing I want to mention here is a little harder. Discern the next steps. You know, we talked about last week about following the Spirit's prompting, and this is a big part of it, but it's a little more. You know, even when you're when you say I want to be the just walk across the room type of person, I'm willing to listen, but I don't know what to do next after I've listened. I know every one of us struggles with this. Every single one of us struggles with what do I do next. It reminds me of a story that took place in Jesus' life. In Mark chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, it says this. Another time he went into the synagogue, and a man with a shriveled hand was there. Some of them were looking for a reason to accuse Jesus, so they watched him closely to see if he would heal him on the Sabbath. And see, and this is where I would say, what do I do next? I know they're just trying to trick me. I just know they're trying to trap me here to get me to heal this guy on the Sabbath. I know it's a setup. I know it's a trick. What do I do? But Jesus didn't struggle. Look at verse 3. Jesus said to the man with the shriveled hand, stand up in front of everyone. Then Jesus asked him, which is lawful asked them, which is lawful on the Sabbath, to do good or to do evil, to save life or to kill? But they remained silent. In verse 5, he looked around at them in anger and deeply distressed at their stubborn hearts, said to the man, Stretch out your hand. He stretched it out, and his hand was completely restored. You know, I find in my life that I walk around, it seems like this a whole lot. Going, I don't know. I don't know what to do next. I don't know what's the best thing to do. And I'm frustrated by that a lot, but sometimes maybe that's exactly where God wants me to be. I can't tell you the number of times I've stood outside of a hospital room or stood at a bedside and the person was sleeping, and I go, do I wake them up or do I let them rest? I don't know what kind of night they had. When you visit that family, do you sit and stay, or do you just make a visit and leave? Do you stay and talk longer to somebody, or do you recognize that their time is short and you follow up later? I don't know. But I know that God wants me to be like Jesus and be guided by doing what is the right thing. Do what you know to do. I love this picture. I've always loved this picture. You know, and there's no words needed. You know, but what's happening is a man encounters a homeless person who has no shoes. And he takes the shoes off his own feet to put on hers. There he knew what to do. Sometimes it's that profound for us that we know exactly what to do. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we just become a resource provider. That when we've walked across the room and we've talked to somebody, we can leave with the thought of, if they've shared something with us, you know, I know a chapter in a book that I've got I'd love for you to read. And you get them the book. Or have you ever listened to, and you share that with them? And it can be something as simple of, can I pray for you? Or this week, I'm going to pray for you every day at 12 o'clock or 10 o'clock. Or do you mind if I call you later this week? That we're just a resource provider. And we do what we think, that we're guided what is the best steps to do at that time. But we do what we know is right. You know, I wonder sometimes what would happen that if every day and every opportunity we have that we just enter into, and we're not going to know, we don't know where it's going to take us. Our hands are up going, I don't know, God. That we just had that prayer on our lips and prayer on our heart. Lord, totally use me today. And we prayed that a number of times. Maybe you're in a setting where every time you walk into your place of business in your office, that's a prayer you could say that day. Lord, totally use me today. Maybe it will become clear that we'll see those opportunities and we'll know what to do at those times. We're not going to know until we try, until we totally surrender and say, Lord, use me today. Just walk across the room.